Chapter 30. Something happens. Brother, Prince Goatee said grimly, wiping a hand across his forehead and brushing away the few remaining raindrops. The time has come for you to choose which path you wish to take. Will you risk all and follow the short and rough path to glory? Or would you prefer the long and easy road to mediocrity? You must decide for yourself, for I cannot choose the way for you. But, ASIN said, his voice booming loud and clear, with no real inflection of any kind, although I may be better off walking the long and easy path, it does not go where I go. Then you must follow the short and rough path, my brother, Prince Goatee announced. Though the short and rough path may lead to untold dangers and maybe certain death, it seems it is the only path available to you. No, ASIN countered dramatically, for in all my wisdom I am aware of a third way, a path that is neither long nor short, and leads to neither glory nor to... Stop, the prince said suddenly. He looked up from the script he had been reading. No one talks like that. It's a play, Ladig explained. The audience expects this sort of exchange between two of the principal players. This is the scene in which Duke Averyman, ASIN began. I know what the scene is, Prince Goatee replied. It's just nonsense. The long and easy path, the short and rough path, and now a third path. He looked at the script, turning to the next page, looking for the bit he meant. To honour. He glanced quizzically at ASIN. Honour. Honour is the third path, ASIN defended proudly. It leads neither to glory nor mediocrity, but to honour. It makes no sense, the prince said. Honour, ASIN repeated. The honour of doing things right rather than blindly charging into battle to claim glory, or staying home and trying to influence the world from the king's throne room. Mediocrity, the prince suggested. Exactly, ASIN replied. Mediocrity. You're new to our troupe, Ladig explained. Maybe this will all sound better once you've learnt how to act. For now, I just want you to read through your lines of ASIN. If we have to make some changes later, then the three of us can get together and make them. But the paths stay in, ASIN announced. They are integral to the plot. Is something wrong with my acting? Prince Goatee asked defensively. Were you trying to act? Ladig asked. You're not very loud, ASIN said. You need to project more. But you're sitting right in front of me, Prince Goatee pointed out. Perhaps, ASIN replied, but the audience won't be. They will be sitting in front of the stage, straining to hear every word you say. You need to be able to reach them. Everyone in the theatre needs to be able to hear what you're saying. Even while you're rehearsing, you need to project, Ladig commented. You need to practice. You need to make it second nature. That is how to act, ASIN added. That is how we professionals do it. I see, the prince replied. He nodded his head once to suggest that he accepted this piece of wisdom. The atmosphere in the coach was quite noisy with her husband and the actor exchanging lines between themselves. Since the start, ASIN had been virtually shouting his lines. That had been bad enough. What was worse was that now that the prince had been taught how to act, he too started to shout them out, and Jenni had to sit next to him. Jenni was doing her best to ignore them both. She was trying to keep herself occupied by watching the rain form droplets on the window and then race each other to the bottom where they vanished. She could tell it was going to be a dull journey. They had been on the road for about 15 minutes now and were still well within the city. The horses were only pulling the coaches at walking pace, but at least it was nice in a relatively dry coach rather than being stuck on the back of a horse in soaking wet clothes. Jenni yawned and watched the world go by through the coach's windows. The people of the city scurried about their business, some of them hurrying to get out of the rain, while others seemed resigned to the fact that they were going to get wet. Very few of those they passed seemed to be in the least bit interested about those in the coach. After a while, they reached the northern gates of the city. Here, their progress was slowed to a crawl. The guards at the gate seemed to be searching everyone trying to leave the city. Apparently, this included all the peasants that were on their way to work on the farms. I wonder what's going on, Jenni commented, more to herself than anything. With her back to the horses, she had to reposition herself in order to see anything of what lay ahead, and even then, the window was at the wrong angle to be all that helpful. Ladig commented unhelpfully. Whatever it was the guards were looking for never did become clear. After a fair wait, the lead coach reached the gate and the guard opened the door on Jenni's side. It took him only a few seconds to look at the faces of the 6 travellers before closing the door and waving the coach on. "Well," Prince Goatee commented, "whatever they're looking for, they obviously don't expect it to be in a coach." "I guess not," Jenni replied. Erskine cleared his throat. He tapped his script irritably and then read, "Thus we must leave this drab old castle and venture forth against the enemy of our people." The prince, caught by surprise, had to search for the right place on his script before he can give the return line. "We must not leave the castle undefended, for if our attack should fail, it should be our last bastion of defence." The journey continued. Their coaches made their way at a slow and steady pace along the King's Eastern Highway. There were 5 major cities in the Dukedom of Broughton, and 3 of them, including the city of Broughton, sat on the King's Highway. As Jenni looked out of the window, things were beginning to feel very monotonous. For mile after mile after they had left Loughton, the coaches were passing through nothing more than farmland. Occasionally she would see someone hard at work in one of the fields, but it wasn't really all that interesting to look at. Jenni began to feel as if she was getting a headache, yet it wasn't really a headache. It was more of a kind of numb feeling in her head caused, she assumed, by the lack of any stimulation. Jenni began to feel as if the farmland was going to go on forever. She knew from her teachings with her father that the largest forest in the kingdom was here in Broughton, but she couldn't remember exactly where that forest was. At the moment, it looked to Jenni as if the entire kingdom was just wide open farmland. It was after they'd been on the road for at least an hour since leaving the city, maybe even closer to 2 hours, that the farmland began to give way to a forest. There were just a few trees scattered on the 2 sides of the road at first, but soon they had crossed the invisible line that separated the farmland from the great forest. The sight of the occasional peasant hard at work in the fields of one of the farms was replaced by the smell of charcoal burning and the sounds of birds in the trees. "Thus we sit here and wait," Prince Goatee commented, "for the king does nothing, while the harridans of our destruction mass on our very borders. A hero is needed, a man who can raise an army to march against the enemy of our freedom." Very apt, Jenni thought to herself. She continued to watch the world go by. Everything seemed so calm and peaceful out there. It was hard to believe that before long all this would be under the elven thumb. There was a loud scream from somewhere in the forest. Jenni was sure it had come from her side of the coach, but she couldn't see what had caused it. All she could imagine was that some hunting animal had caught some prey animal. Jenni peered intently out of the window. At least it had stopped raining now, but with all the trees it was hard to see much of anything. For a moment she caught sight of a very large bird-like creature flying overhead from the corner of her eye. When she tried to look at it though, her vision was blocked by the tree sitting so close to the road that it actually scraped its branches along the coach's paintwork. By the time they were clear of the tree, the bird thing had gone. As she leaned back against the cushions, Jenni sighed. This was going to be a long journey. Had she ridden to Broughton on her own horse, she was certain she could have been there by now, but as it was, she doubted they'd covered more than a third of the distance between the 2 cities. It didn't help that no one seemed really inclined to engage anyone in conversation. Erskine and her husband were deep in their script reading, and it seemed almost as if Estelle and Ludwig didn't want to speak for fear of disturbing their concentration. Ludwig at least seemed to have the answer to the monotony of the journey. He had closed his eyes. Jenni didn't know whether or not the man was asleep, but he certainly looked quite peaceful. It seemed to Jenni that trying to get some sleep was a good idea. She sunk into the cushions as much as she could and closed her eyes. She assumed they would wake her when they stopped for lunch. The prince continued to be distracting with that handsome voice of his as he read the lines from the script. Yet Jenni soon found herself drifting off to sleep. Jenni had no idea how long she had been asleep. The coach had sped up suddenly and the lurch into speed had shaken her from her sleep. Then it sounded as if something had struck the roof of the coach. They were still in the great forest, so Jenni assumed that it was probably an acorn or some sort of large seed. She snuggled into the cushions again and tried to drift back to sleep. There was another loud thump on the roof of the coach. Jenni began to wonder what was going on and why were they travelling so fast now. The trees seemed to be shooting past the window at a fair pace. The horses must have been coaxed to a gallop for some reason. There were looks of worried concern on the faces of Ludwig, Estelle and Erskine. Then she turned her head to look at her husband. "What happened?" she asked sleepily. "Bandits," Estelle suggested. She peered carefully through the window. Don't worry, we'll be clear of them soon, if they don't hit our driver, Erskine confided. There were more loud thumps. It wasn't just the roof of the coach that was getting hit, but the sides as well. The coach was like a strong steel cage. The travellers might as well have been in an armoured box. The arrows of the attackers were making holes in that armour. The tip of an arrow appeared in the door of the coach, a mere fraction of an inch short of Jenny's knee. Jenny looked at the thing with shock, and then placed her thumb and forefinger around the point and tried to pull it the rest of the way through. She couldn't. It was firmly lodged in the door. Fortunately, they aren't very good shots, Erskine commented. No, Jenny said. She indicated the arrow by her knee, and then another couple that were poking through the ceiling and had gotten stuck in the cotton mesh that was there to protect the heads of anyone who stood up. They're playing with us. What kind of game is this? Estelle screamed. The kind harpies like to play, the prince told her. We're just sport to them, Jenny added. An arrow suddenly struck and smashed the window, shattering it into 1,000 pieces and sprinkling Jenny with broken shards. Harpies? Erskine said. It was clear he was trying to reassure himself as much as anything. Don't talk rot. What would harpies be doing this far south? Having fun, the prince declared. He shifted his weight on the bench a little and looked worriedly at Jenny. I wish you'd let me buy that sword. What, one swordsman against however many huntresses armed with bows and dart throwers? Jenny countered. They'd shoot you down before you got close enough to spit at them. I guess you're right, the prince replied. I just wish I could do something. Well, someone needs to do something, Estelle screeched. If only we had a bow, Jenny commented. The last time I was in a situation like this, my brother had brought his bow along, and we also happened to have an expert markswoman with us. Our attackers didn't stand a chance. You've been in this situation before? Erskine asked. From the way he spoke, it was clear he didn't believe a word. This isn't the time, Estelle screamed in panic. Suddenly there was a loud clomp on the roof of the coach. That wasn't an arrow, Jenny said, glancing up. There were some strange scratching noises on the roof of the coach, and the distinctive sound of a bow being drawn. I think they're finished playing, the prince declared. A moment later there was the sharp verdunk sound of an arrow hitting its mark. The coach suddenly went over a bump in the road, and the horses began to slow. Suddenly, everything seemed to go relatively quiet. Everyone inside the coach seemed to hold their breath as the only sounds to be heard were those of the creature on the roof, approaching the driver's bench, and taking over the reins of the horses. That's it, the prince declared as the horses came slowly to a stop. Game over. We lose. That can't be it, Estelle said. She opened the door on her side of the coach and jumped out. Jenny didn't see what happened to Estelle, but she heard a lot of giggling coming from somewhere close overhead, and there were a lot of bows suddenly being fired in quick succession. Mother! Erskine cried, climbing to his feet. Stay put, the prince insisted, or you'll go the same way. These creatures aren't messing around, not anymore. Jenny glanced quickly at Erskine and Ludwig. Is everyone okay? Mother's dead, Erskine claimed. Are you okay? Jenny insisted. No wounds? No, Erskine replied. I wasn't hit. Jenny changed the focus of her attention to Ludwig. Ludwig just smiled grimly and shook his head, indicating that he, too, was unscathed. Jenny nodded, and then she nudged her husband. Are you all right, dear? For the moment, love, the prince replied. Jenny then called, What about you, Alice? Did you get hit in the attack? There was no reply. Alice, Jenny called again. There was a lot of concern in the voice. Had Alice been struck during the attack? The fact was that Jenny couldn't remember Alice saying a word since the coach had first started to move. The prince turned his full attention towards his sister, and suddenly his entire body language drooped as if to suggest something terrible had happened. Alice, he said weakly. What is it? Jenny asked, the worry strong in her voice. She's asleep, the prince replied. Oh, Jenny said crestfallen. Well, Erskine asked confused. She's asleep. She's been asleep since before we left the city. What's wrong with that? I think we have more to worry about right now than someone falling asleep. You wouldn't understand, the prince replied. Wake her, sweetie, Jenny said gently, and let's hope that she is still herself. I don't understand you two. I'm more concerned about what the harpies have planned for the rest of us, Erskine muttered. Whatever the harpies had in mind for the travelling players, they wouldn't have long to find out. 3 harpies landed within a few feet of the window. The 3 of them were all armed with dart throwers. They landed so close that it was easy for Jenny to make out every word that passed between them. I tell you, my shot was the closest, one of them said. Don't be stupid, said the second. My shot hit much closer than yours. Does it really matter? The third said. You would say that, the first commented. Your shots weren't even close. No, said the second. This is important. This is my victory. I was the closest. I was closer, the first pressed. Look, the third offered, looking at the second. It's only a game. Let her have her victory if it means that much to her. She's due to be sent to the mail tomorrow, and we don't want her saying bad things about us to her. There was more giggling from a harpy. I guess you're right, the second harpy commented. She looked at the first and said, Well done, you won. The first harpy seemed a little unsure at first, but then she smiled and nodded. Good. Glad you recognise my superiority. Now wait a minute, the second protested. Leave it out, the third gave the second a warning. Let it go. The second harpy nodded and turned her attention fully to those inside the coach. So, what do we have? The first of the harpies walked up to the coach. She pushed her friend to the side and peered in through the window. Quite clearly there were 5 in here. With the 12 we took from the other 2 coaches, I believe that makes a total of 17. With the horses and those who were killed during the hunt, we should be feasting for days. You intend to eat us? Jenny asked. She tried to sound inquisitive, rather than scared or threatening as she felt. The harpy looked straight at Jenny, but without a moment's hesitation said, But of course, what else do you do with prey? Aristine looked at Jenny incredulously. You speak harpy as well? She does, the prince confided. Wait, the second of the 3 harpies said, suddenly realising the significance of what had just happened. She approached the coach and said, You understand us? I do, Jenny responded coldly. The second harpy seemed to have a sudden gleam in her eye. We might have a job for you. We need someone who can act as an interpreter between ourselves and any other members of your race that we might encounter. Just why do you think I might be willing to help you? Jenny replied defiantly. It'll keep you alive, the harpy said, as long as you continue to be of use to us. That's not enough, Jenny replied gruffly. Your life isn't enough? The harpy sounded slightly angry. Not enough, Jenny repeated, refusing to be cowed. Fine, the harpy said. I can make no promises. You'll have to talk to our leader. Maybe she will be willing to make some concessions you will accept. I want the safety of my friends to be assured, Jenny insisted. You'll be lucky, the harpy replied. But maybe you can arrange a compromise. I can only guarantee your safety because I know we need an interpreter. I found her, the first harpy commented. She spoke to me first. She's my discovery. I'm the one that has to promise her safety. Oh, shut up, the second replied.